The rain from the night still lingered on the road when Emily Grace Walker vanished in the college town of Cookeville, Tennessee, population just over 34,000. On the damp evening of September 14, 2011, a thin mist draped Putnam County, muting the neon signs and dimming the glow of the streetlights. At 10:50 p.m., a passerby noticed Emily, a 19-year-old Tennessee Tech student, standing beside a green Ford pickup in an empty parking lot. She had just finished her evening shift at the Jefferson Avenue diner, her worn canvas backpack slung over one shoulder, exhaustion etched in her face. The man in the truck leaned out, speaking to her, as the yellow light overhead cast long, uneasy shadows across the wet asphalt. Minutes later, Emily's phone pinged its last signal on I-40 before falling silent forever. No goodbye text, no trace, just a vanished college sophomore and a mystery that would haunt Cookeville for the next decade, until a single overlooked clue finally cracked the case wide open. Before we dive in this case, make sure to like this video and also comment heart emoji if you love your mom. The rain from the night still clung to the streets of Cookeville, Tennessee, leaving slick reflections of neon signs and street lamps across the quiet town. On September 14, 2011, the air was thick with late summer humidity, but a fine mist drifted low over Putnam County like a veil. To most of the town's 34,000 residents, it was an ordinary Wednesday night. College students at Tennessee Tech studying late, families finishing dinner, and truckers pulling into the interstate gas stations before heading back out onto I-40. But in a nearly empty parking lot just off Jefferson Avenue, something unforgettable was unfolding. At 10:50 p.m., a passerby slowed their car when they noticed an unusual scene under a weak, flickering streetlight. There stood Emily Grace Walker, a 19-year-old sophomore at Tennessee Tech, her damp hair pulled back, her canvas backpack slung over one shoulder. She had just finished her evening shift at the local diner, her face still carrying the weariness of a long day on her feet. Next to her idled a green Ford pickup truck, its paint dulled by rain, its driver leaning halfway out of the window. From the passerby's vantage point, the man seemed to be speaking softly, motioning with his hand as though offering something. Perhaps a ride, perhaps reassurance. Emily shifted her weight, adjusting her backpack strap, caught between caution and politeness. The glow of the overhead light bent their shadows across the slick asphalt, two figures blurred by mist, captured in a moment that would soon spiral into tragedy. The passerby, thinking little of it, continued driving. In their memory later, the detail would stand out like a wound. Emily, half turning toward the truck, the unease not quite hidden in her eyes. Minutes later, Emily's phone pinged its last signal on Interstate 40 just outside town. Then it went dark. No more calls, no reassuring texts to her mother waiting at home. Just silence, sudden and absolute. The following morning, when Emily failed to show up for her 8 a.m. psychology lecture, her friends grew worried. When she didn't answer calls from her mother, panic began to ripple. Within hours, police cruisers traced the routes she might have taken. Campus security posted alerts, and volunteers combed the wooded edges of Cookeville. But Emily was gone, as though swallowed by the mist. What lingered in that first haunting day was the image of her canvas backpack, always by her side, filled with textbooks, notebooks, and the small personal objects that made up a young woman's life. When officers searched the parking lot later that week, the backpack was not there. Nor was it in her dorm room nor in her car. It had vanished with her, leaving behind only a single clue, a torn strap, caught in brush near an underpass, discovered days later. For Cookeville, a town both shaped by its college and anchored by its small-town trust, the news struck hard. Students whispered in hallways, parents pulled their children closer, and every green Ford truck became a phantom in the rearview mirror. And so began a story that would stretch more than a decade. A story of unanswered questions, of a family unwilling to let go, of technology waiting for its moment to speak. For 10 years, Emily Grace Walker's name would hover like a ghost over vigils, headlines, and unsolved files. Yet in that parking lot, on that misty September night, the seeds of truth had already been left behind, waiting for the day when science and persistence would finally bring them into the light. For those who knew her, Emily Grace Walker was the kind of young woman whose energy filled a room without ever trying. At just 19, she carried herself with a steady, quiet determination that belied her age. A sophomore at Tennessee Tech University, Emily balanced her life between classes, late-night study sessions, and evening shifts at the Jefferson Avenue diner, a modest roadside spot that served truckers, students, and families alike. Emily had dreams of becoming a teacher. She loved children, loved the idea of guiding them through the confusing maze of growing up. Her mother often said Emily had an old soul, a maturity that set her apart, but also a spark of warmth that made her easy to trust. Her younger brother Michael, just 14 at the time, idolized her. He often waited up, pretending to study, just to hear her stories from the diner before they both went to bed. That Wednesday, September 14th, 2011, unfolded like countless others. Classes in the morning, a quick sandwich for lunch, and then the familiar pull of work. Emily's shift at the diner started at 5 p.m. She tied her apron, smoothed her hair, and tucked her canvas backpack into the corner near the staff room, the one she never went anywhere without. It wasn't stylish, faded khaki with one fraying strap, but it was hers. Inside were her textbooks, a spiral notebook filled with half-sketched lesson plans, her phone charger, and a keychain shaped like a tiny silver owl, a gift from her brother. The evening was steady but unremarkable. Truckers came and went, the jukebox played faintly in the background, and Emily smiled through the routine. A few classmates stopped by for coffee, waving at her as they left. Around 10 p.m., she began cleaning tables, knowing she'd clock out soon. She texted her mother at 10:15, "On my way home in a bit. Love you." By 10:45, the diner had thinned out. Emily slipped off her apron, slung her backpack over one shoulder, and stepped out into the damp night air. The rain had slowed to a mist, the parking lot shining with scattered puddles beneath the glow of tired street lamps. It was a short walk to her car, but a few spaces away, another vehicle caught her attention. A green Ford pickup truck sat idling near the edge of the lot. Its headlights were dimmed, its engine humming low. As Emily approached her car, the driver leaned out the window. Witnesses later described him as a middle-aged man, heavy-set, wearing a baseball cap pulled low. He spoke to her. What exactly he said, no one knew, but his tone carried an unsettling familiarity. Emily hesitated. She shifted her backpack higher on her shoulder and glanced toward her own vehicle. That was the last confirmed sighting of her alive. By 11 p.m., her car remained untouched, locked in its space, but her phone, which had been active only minutes earlier, pinged its final signal on I-40 eastbound, just outside Cookeville. Then it went dead. No emergency call, no message to her family, nothing. When Emily's mother awoke at 2 a.m. and noticed her daughter wasn't home, worry set in immediately. By dawn, the worry had turned to fear. Emily never missed class, never failed to check in, and her backpack, her constant companion, was missing too. It was as if she had stepped off the face of the earth. The police would later piece together fragments, the witness in the parking lot, the brief glimpse of Emily's hesitation, the truck's description. But in those crucial first hours, the picture was blurry. For Emily's family, the night was a slow descent into panic. Calls went unanswered. A trip to campus revealed her dorm room exactly as she'd left it that morning, bed neatly made, books stacked. The one thing missing was that faded backpack. The backpack would become an anchor to the case, a symbol of Emily herself. Wherever she went, it went too. Its absence was louder than any words, a silent declaration that something terrible had interrupted the rhythm of her life. And so, in a small Tennessee town still dripping with rain, a mystery was born. The ordinary routines of a college student closing a shift had been shattered in minutes. A green truck rolled off into the mist, a phone went dark on the interstate, and a family's world fell into silence. What remained was fear, confusion, and a question that would echo for the next decade. Where was Emily Grace Walker? The morning after Emily failed to come home, her mother, Angela Walker, picked up the phone and called everyone she could think of. Friends, classmates, the diner, even the small apartment Emily sometimes studied at with her lab partner. Nobody had seen her since she left work. At first, some tried to reassure Angela. Maybe she stayed with a friend, they said. She's 19, maybe she just needed a break. But Angela knew better. Emily was responsible to a fault. She texted if she was running 10 minutes late, let alone vanishing overnight. By mid-morning, Angela drove to the Jefferson Avenue diner herself. Emily's co-workers confirmed she had clocked out at 10:45 p.m., smiled her usual goodnight, and walked into the misty parking lot. Her car was still sitting there, locked, dry inside, untouched. The keys were in Angela's hand. Emily always carried a spare. But her backpack, the frayed canvas one she never set down for long, was gone. Angela's breath caught when she opened the car door and saw the empty passenger seat. At 11 a.m., Angela called Cookeville police and reported her daughter missing. Officers arrived quickly, understanding that college students often turned up after a night of independence, but also recognizing Angela's certainty that something was wrong. Within hours, a missing persons report was filed, and detectives canvassed the area. Witnesses trickled forward. A regular at the diner mentioned seeing Emily pause by a green Ford pickup in the lot. Another recalled the truck pulling out slowly onto Jefferson Avenue not long before closing. No one had gotten the license plate. But one small detail stuck. The driver had worn a baseball cap, brim pulled low. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start a search. By nightfall on September 15th, the first official ground search began. Police, volunteers, and college students combed the surrounding areas, ditches, wooded lots, and the access roads near I-40. Flashlights cut across damp grass, voices echoed in the night air, and Angela walked with them, refusing to be left behind. They found nothing but shadows and silence. The following morning, the case escalated. Detectives called in the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, TBI, for assistance. Phone records revealed Emily's last signal, a brief ping to a cell tower along I-40 eastbound, just 2 miles from the diner. From there, her phone went dead. Investigators pulled traffic camera footage, but the rain and low visibility that night made the images nearly useless. Still, hope lingered. Maybe she had been forced into a vehicle but was still alive. Maybe she had left behind something the kidnapper hadn't noticed. On September 16th, the second full day of searching, officers widened their grid. Just after noon, near a shallow ditch off a service road parallel to the interstate, a volunteer spotted something pale against the mud. When they bent to pick it up, their hearts stopped. It was the frayed strap of a canvas backpack, snapped clean from the rest of the bag. The strap was soaked from the rain, caked with dirt, but unmistakable. It belonged to Emily. Angela broke down when detectives showed it to her. That backpack had been Emily's shadow, her comfort, her habit. The broken strap wasn't just a possession, it was proof of a struggle. Someone had pulled her away with enough force to tear it. The discovery shifted the investigation into high gear. Crime scene technicians collected the strap, sealed it, and noted trace evidence clinging to the fabric. A hair was found knotted in the threads. At the time, DNA technology wasn't yet as sharp as it would become a decade later, but the evidence was preserved with meticulous care. The third day brought more desperation. Flyers with Emily's face were taped across storefronts, stapled to telephone poles, and handed out at gas stations. Students organized a candlelight vigil on the steps of Tennessee Tech, holding hands and praying for her safe return. Police dogs tracked faint scents along the roadside but lost them near the interstate, where traffic washed everything away. Detectives questioned known offenders in the area, combed through security footage from convenience stores, and checked truck stops along I-40. Leads came in fast but shallow. Sightings of a girl matching Emily's description, rumors of a green pickup in nearby counties. None of them held. By the end of 72 hours, the optimism that Emily would be found alive had begun to dim. The evidence, the empty car, the silent phone, the broken strap, pointed not to a voluntary disappearance, but to violence. Still, Angela clung to hope. "She's out there," she told reporters, voice cracking. "She's my daughter. She's fighting to come home." But beneath the hope, investigators knew the truth. The first 72 hours are the most crucial in any missing persons case. And Emily's had slipped away into the Tennessee mist, leaving only fragments behind. In the early days of Emily's disappearance, detectives felt the weight of the town's eyes on them. Every resident of Cookeville seemed to whisper about the green pickup truck, but without a plate number or a clear view of the driver, the clue was little more than smoke. Investigators knew they needed to look closer to home. Statistics often pointed inward, to boyfriends, classmates, co-workers. One name surfaced quickly, Ryan Mitchell, a 20-year-old part-time student at Tennessee Tech who had worked alongside Emily at the diner. Ryan was lanky, quiet, and had once shared a few shifts with her during the summer. Some of Emily's friends recalled that he seemed to like her, more than just a casual co-worker crush. He lingered after work, sometimes asking if she needed a ride home, though she always declined. On the night of September 14th, Ryan had clocked out just 20 minutes before Emily. To detectives, that timing was too close to ignore. He admitted he was there that night, admitted he had seen Emily lock up, and admitted he owned a vehicle, though not a green truck, but a dented silver Honda Civic. Still, proximity and interest made him a natural focus. Police brought him in for questioning on September 16th, just as news of the backpack strap discovery broke. The interrogation room camera caught Ryan shifting nervously in his chair, chewing his lip, his hands clenched. When asked if he had feelings for Emily, he muttered, "Yeah, I liked her." But she wasn't interested, detectives pressed. Where had he gone after work? Who could confirm his whereabouts? Ryan explained that he drove home immediately, stopping only to pick up fast food. He said his mother was awake when he got in around 11:15 and she could vouch for him. But the police weren't satisfied. Emily's phone had gone dark right around that same time. Coincidence or connection? For days, suspicion swirled around Ryan. Students whispered in the cafeteria that he had been obsessed with Emily. Customers at the diner whispered that he'd followed her into the parking lot. His name leaked through town like smoke, and soon his family received anonymous calls telling them to watch their son. But rumors only fueled investigators so far. They needed evidence. On September 18th, forensic technicians collected Ryan's car, photographing every surface, swabbing for trace DNA, searching for fibers, hair, anything that could tie him to Emily. They found crumbs, dust, and discarded soda cups, but nothing belonging to Emily. Then came the most decisive test. Investigators asked Ryan for a DNA swab. His family urged him to cooperate, and he did. The sample was rushed to the state lab in Nashville. Weeks later, the results came back. The DNA did not match the hair found tangled in Emily's torn backpack strap. Ryan's alibi also solidified. Phone records confirmed he had texted a friend from home at 11:20 p.m., attaching a photo of a video game he was playing, time-stamped and geolocated from his house. His mother's statement aligned. Piece by piece, the suspicion crumbled. Detectives had to face it. Ryan Mitchell, while awkward and perhaps overly fond of Emily, had nothing to do with her disappearance. He was just another young man caught in the undertow of a community's fear. When police officially cleared him, relief washed over his family, but damage lingered. His reputation at school never fully recovered. For months, classmates eyed him with suspicion, and the shadow of being the guy the police looked at followed him through the halls. For investigators, the lesson was sobering. They had lost valuable time chasing a lead that felt right but proved wrong. Meanwhile, the real perpetrator, the man in the green truck, was still out there, untraced, unbothered, and perhaps emboldened. Angela Walker never believed Ryan was guilty. She had seen the way he blushed when Emily laughed, the way his hands trembled when he spoke to reporters insisting, "I didn't hurt her. I'd never hurt her." To Angela, he seemed like a scapegoat, a boy caught in a storm bigger than himself. She told the press, "I want the focus back on finding my daughter. That's what matters." But the distraction cost the investigation momentum. While the community latched onto the idea of Ryan's guilt, the real clues risked slipping into the background. The green Ford truck that left Jefferson Avenue on September 14th remained unidentified, its driver still a ghost in the mist. As suspicion of Ryan dissolved, so did the sense of direction. Detectives returned to their maps, their logs, their interviews, frustrated and exhausted. The case, once a bright flame of urgency, began to flicker. And the town, hungry for answers, turned from hopeful to haunted. The red herring had been cast aside, but its ripple effects lingered. The wrong man had been accused, the right man had vanished back into obscurity, and Emily's family was left waiting in unbearable silence. In a town the size of Cookeville, nothing stays quiet for long. By the end of September 2011, Emily's disappearance wasn't just a local tragedy. It was a headline that stretched across Tennessee newspapers and spilled into regional newscasts. Her picture, a smiling brunette with hopeful eyes, became as familiar as the weather report. At Tennessee Tech University, classmates covered the campus bulletin boards with missing posters. Students walked past them on their way to class, catching glimpses of Emily's face and wondering if they'd seen her on the night she vanished. Professors paused lectures to acknowledge her absence, reminding their students to walk in pairs, to avoid dark parking lots. The sense of safety on campus had fractured. By early October, a candlelight vigil was held on the university lawn. Hundreds gathered, students, professors, local families, even strangers from neighboring counties who had followed the story on the news. Candles flickered against the autumn air as Angela Walker spoke softly into the microphone, her voice trembling but clear. "My Emily is strong. She loves this community, and I know this community loves her. Please, if you know anything, come forward. Don't let fear keep you silent." The vigil ended with a song Emily's church choir often sang. People held hands, swaying together, and in that moment, Cookeville felt united against the darkness. But unity carried its own pressure on investigators, on the family, and on the small police department suddenly under scrutiny. News trucks lined Jefferson Avenue near the diner, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. Reporters knocked on doors, pressing neighbors for comments. National outlets picked up the story. College student vanishes after shift, Tennessee town on edge. The narrative was gripping, but it came with side effects. Leads poured in by the dozens, many vague, some entirely fabricated. Tips claimed Emily had been seen in Nashville, in Knoxville, even as far away as Memphis. Each one had to be checked, eating up manpower and time. The pressure weighed hardest on law enforcement. Cookeville Police Chief Mark Davison faced reporters almost daily, assuring them the case was still active, that every resource was being tapped. Behind the podium, his words were steady, but behind closed doors, frustration mounted. The green Ford truck remained elusive. The DNA from the backpack strap was inconclusive with the tools of 2011. And the town's patience was thinning. Fear grew tangible. Parents kept their daughters close, urging them not to walk alone. Students requested escorts across campus at night. Diner staff no longer lingered after shifts, locking up in pairs. Sales of pepper spray and keychain alarms spiked at local shops. What had once been a friendly college town now felt shadowed by suspicion. For Angela and Michael, the attention was both a blessing and a curse. The media amplified Emily's story, ensuring her name stayed alive. But the constant presence of cameras outside their home was exhausting. Angela couldn't leave for the grocery store without being followed by microphones. Michael, only 14, overheard rumors at school. Claims that Emily must have run away, that she'd gotten into trouble she couldn't face. He lashed out at classmates, fiercely defending the sister who had been his confidant. Angela tried to hold the family together, but nights grew heavier. The empty chair at the dinner table became unbearable. Emily's owl keychain hung by the door where she had last left it, a silent reminder of absence. Community members raised money to support the search. Banners stretched across Main Street, "Bring Emily home." Local churches held prayer circles. Volunteers handed out flyers at rest stops and truck stops along I-40. Yet, with every passing week, hope seemed to teeter on the edge of despair. Behind it all, the unspoken question grew louder. Were the police failing? Some critics accused them of focusing too long on Ryan Mitchell. Others whispered about mishandled evidence. Letters to the editor questioned whether small-town investigators were equipped for a case that demanded forensic precision. Chief, Davison bristled at the criticism but couldn't deny the reality. Leads were drying up. By late November, 2 months into the case, no new evidence had surfaced beyond that torn strap and the fading witness accounts of a green truck in the mist. The town's unity began to shift into quiet resignation. Angela, however, refused to let Emily's story fade. She stood outside the diner one brisk evening, speaking into a local news camera. Her voice cracked, but her words carried, "I will not let my daughter be forgotten. Someone knows what happened that night. Please, look into your heart and come forward." Her plea rippled across Tennessee. But for all the candles lit, the flyers posted, the prayers whispered, the silence surrounding Emily's disappearance remained unbroken. And the pressure, on police, on the family, on the community itself, grew heavier with each unanswered day. By the spring of 2012, the once relentless storm surrounding Emily Grace Walker's disappearance had slowed to a weary drizzle. The posters that once blanketed Cookeville's storefronts faded in the Tennessee sun, their corners curling, colors bleeding. Some were torn down, replaced with advertisements for concerts or yard sales. Others remained, weathered and overlooked, silent reminders of a case slipping into the background of daily life. Inside the Cookeville Police Department, the task force created to focus solely on Emily's case dwindled. Detectives rotated back into other assignments as tips dried up. The green Ford truck had never been located, and the DNA from the torn strap of Emily's backpack was labeled inconclusive, stored in an evidence freezer with dozens of other unresolved items. Each time Angela Walker called the station, she was met with the same steady but heartbreaking refrain. "We're still looking, Mrs. Walker, but nothing new has come in." Officially, the case was never closed. But by late 2012, it was moved into what law enforcement termed a cold case status. Resources shifted. Priorities changed, and Emily's file became one among many stacked on metal shelves, waiting for a spark that might never come. For the Walker family, the shift was devastating. Angela described it as a second loss, like the day they told me she was gone all over again. But this time they were telling me hope was gone too. She refused to let it end there. Each September, on the anniversary of Emily's disappearance, Angela organized small vigils at the Tennessee Tech lawn. Attendance dwindled over the years, from hundreds in 2011 to a few dozen by 2015. Still, candles flickered and prayers were whispered. Year after year, Emily's younger brother Michael carried his grief into adulthood. He graduated high school in 2016 with an empty seat reserved in the audience for Emily, adorned with her favorite blue scarf. By then, classmates spoke of her more as a ghost story than a memory. Some avoided the topic entirely, as if silence could shield them from discomfort. For Michael, silence was unbearable. He pushed himself into community college, studying criminal justice, determined that one day he might work the very kinds of cases that had stolen his sister. Meanwhile, rumors festered. Without updates from police, speculation filled the void. Some whispered that Emily had willingly left town, running from responsibilities or secrets. Others clung to the belief that Ryan Mitchell, the red herring boyfriend, had somehow slipped through cracks in the investigation. Ryan, who had since moved to Knoxville, lived under a shadow of suspicion, even after his alibi cleared him. "It follows you everywhere," he once told a local paper in 2017. "Even if you're innocent, people look at you and think, maybe." The years stretched on. Birthdays passed with no candles blown out, Christmas mornings with one stocking left untouched. Angela kept Emily's room intact, the bedspread smoothed, the owl keychain still hanging on the lamp. Friends of Emily's graduated, married, had children. Their lives moved forward, but Angela's remained frozen in 2011. By 2018, 7 years had passed. Emily's disappearance had become a line in local memory, invoked when people spoke of Cookeville's tragedies. "Do you remember that college girl, the one who vanished from the diner shift?" Strangers would murmur. But even tragedies fade with time. The vigils grew quieter. The newspaper stopped marking the anniversaries. The Walker family carried the burden mostly alone, and yet Emily's name never truly disappeared. At Tennessee Tech, students in the criminal justice program studied her case in classes on missing persons. Volunteers from nonprofits like Missing in America added her to their databases, ensuring her profile remained visible online. Her face still appeared in occasional social media posts, often reshared by Angela with a caption that read simply, "Still missing. Still loved. Still ours." Cold cases are often described as suspended in time, but for families, time does not suspend. It grinds on, each day widening the gap between the last moment they saw their loved one and the uncertain possibility of answers. For Angela, hope became both a balm and a torment. She kept a journal, writing letters addressed to Emily. "Dear Em, I dreamed of you again last night. You were smiling, sitting on the diner stool, backpack slung over your shoulder like you always did. I will never stop looking. Love, Mom." By 2020, 9 years into the silence, the case had gathered dust in storage but remained alive in Angela's heart. She had written to lawmakers, urging more funding for cold case units. She had begged police chiefs to send Emily's evidence for retesting as DNA technology advanced. Each request was met with polite acknowledgement but no breakthroughs. And then, in early 2021, on the 10-year anniversary, the family held a vigil unlike the others. A new detective from the cold case unit, assigned as part of a statewide initiative, stood at Angela's side and promised that Emily's case would be reviewed. His words were careful, but to Angela they felt like the first true breath of hope in a decade. The cold case designation had frozen the investigation in paperwork. But technology was thawing the ice. And somewhere, on the shelf of that evidence locker, sat a torn backpack strap that had not yet told its full story. By the time 2021 arrived, 10 long years had passed since Emily Walker vanished into the misty night of Cookeville. For most of the town, her case had become a quiet scar in memory. But for Angela Walker, it remained an open wound. What Angela could not have known was that the very advances in forensic science she had begged for were finally reaching the threshold where they could change everything. That spring, Tennessee's Cold Case Review Unit received new funding and equipment. Among their priorities was reviewing unsolved cases with biological evidence, cases like Emily's. Detective Laura Bennett, newly transferred from Nashville, pulled Emily's thick, time-worn file from storage. She read the interviews, studied the timeline, and then focused on one detail many had overlooked: the torn strap from Emily's canvas backpack. Back in 2011, testing of the strap revealed trace biological material, minute skin cells, possibly transferred during a struggle, but the sample was far too degraded for the technology of the time. Inconclusive, the lab report had said, sealing that scrap of cloth away in a freezer. But in 2021, inconclusive no longer meant impossible. Enter forensic genetic genealogy, a breakthrough method combining DNA analysis with publicly available family tree databases. The process didn't just look for an exact match in CODIS, the FBI's national database. It looked for relatives, even distant cousins, who might share DNA markers with the unknown contributor. From there, genealogists could build family trees, narrowing down potential suspects. The strap was carefully thawed, and technicians in the state lab began the painstaking work of extracting every usable strand of genetic material. The results stunned them. Even with degradation, they recovered enough to create a viable profile. The case took a sudden leap forward. Using the new method, genealogists traced the DNA back to a cluster of families with deep roots in Putnam County, Tennessee. A web of names appeared on charts and family trees, stretching back generations. Among them, one surname kept surfacing in connection with Cookeville: Harper. Detective Bennett cross-referenced the Harper family with Emily's case file. One name jolted her: David Harper. In 2011, he had been interviewed briefly as a local mechanic who sometimes stopped at the diner for late-night coffee. At the time, he was dismissed as peripheral, just one of dozens of townsfolk spoken to in the early days. He hadn't owned a green Ford pickup, at least not officially. But genealogical links suggested otherwise. The DNA on the backpack strap almost certainly belonged to someone within the Harper family, and David fit the timeline, the proximity, and the profile. The realization was chilling. For a decade, David Harper had lived quietly, running his small auto repair shop, chatting at Little League games, and even attending one of Emily's early vigils. He had passed through suspicion unnoticed, blending into the rhythms of small-town life. Still, science alone couldn't close the circle. The genealogy pointed toward the Harper family, but investigators needed direct evidence tying David to the DNA. The cold case unit began building a covert operation, watching Harper's daily routines. They couldn't afford to tip their hand. If he caught wind of their interest, years of work might vanish. For Angela, none of this was visible yet. She only knew that for the first time in years, detectives returned her calls with cautious optimism. "We're looking at new technology," they told her. "There may be developments soon." She clutched onto those words as though they were lifelines, daring herself to hope again. The torn strap, overlooked and underestimated, had been waiting patiently in storage all these years. Now it had become the key to unlocking the mystery. It was a reminder that in the world of cold cases, sometimes justice doesn't come because evidence is missing, but because the tools to see it clearly haven't yet been invented. The fuse had been lit. What remained was to see whether it would burn all the way to the truth. For 10 years, David Harper had been no more than a passing name in the original investigation, a mechanic whose presence in Emily's world seemed incidental. Yet as genealogical testing tightened the net, his name resurfaced again and again, not as a background figure, but as a focal point. Harper was the kind of man who blended easily into small-town Cookeville life. In 2011, he was 32 years old, working at his father's auto shop just off South Willow Avenue, less than 2 miles from the diner where Emily clocked out her final shift. Customers described him as reliable, quiet, and hands-on, the type of person who'd give a fair price on a tire change or stay late to finish a repair. He wasn't flashy, didn't drink heavily in public, and had no history of violent crime. On the surface, he was unremarkable. What stood out in hindsight was how often his path intersected with Emily's without raising suspicion. Harper's shop did maintenance work for delivery trucks that stopped at the Jefferson Avenue diner. He was known to swing by for coffee late at night, sometimes just before closing. In interviews conducted back in 2011, he told detectives he had seen the girl around but claimed he didn't know her name until after she disappeared. That statement was accepted at face value. After all, dozens of Cookeville residents could say the same. But investigators now saw a different picture. Harper's shop was located on the same route Emily took home from work. He owned a second-hand green Ford pickup during that year, though records showed he sold it in 2012, months after Emily vanished. At the time of the original inquiry, no one pressed him hard on vehicle ownership, and the sale quietly closed the trail. Looking deeper, detectives found small cracks in his ordinary facade. Harper had attended one of Emily's candlelight vigils in October 2011. Photographs from the event showed him standing near the back of the crowd, arms folded, his expression unreadable. At the time, no one questioned his presence. Vigils were community-wide, drawing hundreds. Yet in retrospect, the sight of a potential suspect mingling among grieving families was unsettling. Friends and neighbors painted a portrait of a man who kept to himself. He lived in a modest house outside town, rarely entertained guests, and avoided social media. He had steady work but little ambition beyond maintaining the shop. David was the kind of guy you'd forget was in the room, one former co-worker recalled. He never wanted attention. That very quality made him easy to overlook, and easy to dismiss in 2011 when detectives had to triage dozens of leads. The family genealogy charts only sharpened the focus. Every branch investigators traced circled back to the Harper bloodline. And in Cookeville, no other Harper fit the timeline and geography like David. He was the cousin, the mechanic, the neighbor who had passed under the radar. Detective Laura Bennett began to study Harper's life in painstaking detail. Surveillance confirmed his routine: up early, at the shop until evening, quiet nights at home. He shopped at the same grocery store where some of Emily's classmates worked part-time. He filled his truck at the gas station near Tennessee Tech. His life was so intertwined with the rhythms of the community that it was almost invisible. For Angela Walker, the idea that her daughter's potential killer had lived undisturbed in Cookeville all this time was a torment she could hardly comprehend. "I must have walked past him at the grocery store," she later reflected. All those years, and he was just there. To prove Harper's guilt, investigators needed more than genealogical probability. They needed a direct, uncontaminated DNA sample to compare with the profile from Emily's backpack strap. Watching him go about his daily business, polite nods to neighbors, greasy hands from engine work, quiet evenings, it was difficult to reconcile the image of a hard-working mechanic with the darkness investigators now suspected. But history had shown them that predators could hide behind the most ordinary masks. David Harper wasn't a shadowy outsider or a name lost to distant records. He was Cookeville's own, a man hiding in plain sight for over a decade, trusted enough to be forgotten. Now the question wasn't whether he was connected, but how to catch him without tipping their hand. Once investigators narrowed their focus to David Harper, the next step was both delicate and decisive: obtaining his DNA without alerting him. The genealogical research had pointed to the Harper bloodline, but circumstantial ties weren't enough for an arrest. The courts demanded a direct match. And in cold cases, that match had to be airtight. Detective Laura Bennett and the Cold Case Review Unit began a quiet surveillance operation. For weeks, they tracked Harper's routines, looking for the right opportunity. He lived a simple life: work at the shop, errands in town, groceries at the Food Lion, occasional visits to a fishing supply store. He wasn't careless, but like anyone, he left behind small traces of himself. The break came on an ordinary Friday night in the summer of 2021. Harper stopped at a roadside convenience store after closing the shop. He bought a soda, a bag of chips, and lingered outside, leaning against his truck in the heavy Tennessee heat. When he finished the drink, he tossed the plastic bottle into a public trash can before driving away. To a passerby, it was an insignificant gesture. To detectives waiting in an unmarked car down the block, it was the moment they had been anticipating. As soon as Harper's taillights disappeared, an officer approached the bin and retrieved the discarded bottle, sealing it in a sterile evidence bag. Chain of custody was logged immediately, ensuring there could be no question later about contamination or mishandling. The sample was rushed to the state crime lab in Nashville. Technicians carefully swabbed the mouth of the bottle, extracting cells from where Harper's lips had touched the plastic. The DNA was then compared directly against the degraded sample preserved from Emily's canvas backpack strap. Weeks of tension followed as the lab ran its tests, double-checking every result. For Angela Walker, the suspense was unbearable. Detectives had told her only that there were developments, careful not to raise false hope. She found herself lying awake at night, replaying the last decade, wondering if justice was finally within reach. Inside the lab, the machines hummed, generating sequences of letters and markers that would either shatter the case open or leave it unresolved yet again. Every technician knew the stakes. They weren't just testing plastic, they were testing 10 years of grief, waiting, and the promise of new technology. On a humid August morning, the call came through. The profiles aligned. Every marker fell into place. Harper's DNA from the soda bottle and the DNA preserved from Emily's backpack strap weren't just similar. They were identical. The analysis would later be summarized in a single phrase that echoed through every report. DNA profile matches 100%. Detective Bennett stared at the results, her pulse quickening. After 10 years of dead ends, they had confirmation. David Harper hadn't just been near Emily Walker. His genetic fingerprint was literally entwined with the last moments of her life. With the science secure, the task turned to strategy. An arrest would require precision. Too sudden, and Harper might flee or destroy evidence. Too cautious, and he might sense the walls closing in. The district attorney's office prepared the necessary warrants, while detectives continued surveillance to ensure Harper's movements remained predictable. At the same time, an undercurrent of unease ran through the team. For a decade, Harper had moved freely in Cookeville, unsuspected. What if he had harmed others during that time? What if he realized he was being watched? Each day felt like a fragile balance between patience and urgency. For Angela, the news came in measured fragments. A detective called to say the lab work had been conclusive, though the full weight of the revelation would be shared later. She gripped the phone in her kitchen, tears brimming in her eyes. For the first time since 2011, she dared to let herself believe her daughter's story might finally have an ending. Behind the quiet houses and steady rhythms of Cookeville, a silent net had closed around David Harper. He had no idea that the simple act of throwing away a soda bottle had ended a decade of secrecy. The next step would not be hidden. It would be public, definitive, and impossible to ignore. On the morning of September 2nd, 2021, a decade minus 12 days since Emily Walker disappeared, the Cookeville Police Department executed their plan. By dawn, unmarked cars lined the quiet street outside David Harper's modest single-story house. Detectives wore plain clothes to avoid attention, but the air around the neighborhood carried a charge that even the cicadas seemed to sense. Inside the command vehicle, Detective Laura Bennett reviewed the arrest warrant one more time. The words blurred slightly. Years of work had come down to this moment. Harper's DNA from the soda bottle had confirmed what genealogical charts and circumstantial evidence had only suggested. The reports were unequivocal. DNA profile matches 100%. At 6:45 a.m., Harper stepped outside carrying a thermos of coffee, dressed in his grease-stained work shirt. He walked toward his truck, likely expecting another routine day at the shop. But instead of engines and customers, he was met with the sharp command of voices calling his name. David Harper, police. Put your hands where we can see them. Neighbors awoke to the sound of firm orders cutting through the still morning. Curtains twitched. Dogs barked. Few could comprehend what was happening until they saw Harper, stunned and confused, being led in handcuffs down his driveway. For years, he had been the quiet mechanic, the man who fixed flat tires and waved politely at the corner store. Now he was at the center of Cookeville's darkest mystery. Angela Walker received the news in a phone call just after sunrise. The voice on the other end was steady but carried emotion. "Angela, we've made an arrest in Emily's case." She sat down hard in her kitchen chair, the weight of 10 years collapsing into that single sentence. Relief and grief battled inside her. Relief that someone was finally being held accountable. Grief that no arrest could return her daughter. By mid-morning, local media swarmed the police station. Headlines appeared online within hours. Cookeville man arrested in 2011, disappearance of Emily Walker. The community's shock was palpable. People who had once stood shoulder to shoulder with Harper at Little League games or church picnics now saw his face splashed across news broadcasts, tied to a crime many feared would never be solved. At the press conference, Detective Bennett stood at the podium, flanked by the district attorney and members of the cold case review unit. She spoke carefully, her voice steady but laced with gravity. "After a decade of unanswered questions, we can confirm that a suspect has been arrested in connection with the disappearance and death of Emily Grace Walker. This arrest is the result of tireless work, technological advances in forensic science, and the unwavering determination of Emily's family." Reporters fired questions. How was he linked? What evidence tied him to the case? Had he confessed? Bennett offered only the essentials. The DNA evidence was conclusive. Further details would emerge during the legal process. For Cookeville, the arrest was both a relief and a rupture. Relief, because the case that had haunted the town for 10 years finally had a name and a face. A rupture because that name and face belonged to someone they thought they knew. Angela stood before cameras later that day, her hands trembling but her voice clear. "For 10 years we've prayed for justice for Emily. Today is the first step toward that justice. Nothing will bring my daughter back, but she deserves the truth to be known, and she deserves accountability." Behind bars, Harper said little at first. Booked into the Putnam County jail, he offered no resistance beyond the shock that seemed to freeze him. In his mugshot, his expression was neither defiant nor remorseful. It was unreadable, as though the double life he had carried for a decade had finally fractured. Cookeville buzzed with disbelief. At the diner where Emily had worked, staff gathered in silence, some crying, others staring at the news on a small mounted television. "He was here," one server whispered. "He used to sit right there drinking coffee after his shift." And all this time, the arrest didn't close the case, but it shifted its weight. For the first time in 10 years, justice had a direction, and it pointed squarely at David Harper. The interrogation room at the Putnam County Sheriff's Office was deliberately plain. White cinderblock walls, a bolted table, and 2 chairs facing each other. A single camera watched from the corner ceiling, its quiet red light blinking steadily. David Harper sat hunched over the table in an orange jumpsuit, his calloused hands clasped tightly as though he were holding on to the last threads of normalcy. Detectives Laura Bennett and Marcus Shaw entered together. They placed a manila folder on the table but didn't open it immediately. Instead, Bennett leaned forward slightly, her voice calm, almost conversational. "David, you know why you're here." He shook his head, his jaw tightening. "I didn't do anything. This is a mistake." Shaw slid the folder across the table and opened it with deliberate slowness. Inside were the lab reports, DNA charts, comparative graphs, and photographs of evidence recovered back in 2011. He tapped his finger against one sheet. "This," Shaw said, "is your DNA profile. And this," he flipped to another, "is the DNA collected from Emily Walker's belongings. They match, 100%. For the first time, Harper's composure faltered. His eyes darted to the camera, then back to the folder. "That doesn't mean anything. People drop things. DNA can get mixed." Bennett didn't flinch. She had heard every variation of denial before. "It wasn't mixed, David. We found your DNA on the strap of her backpack. We found it inside her car. And we found it on the soda bottle you left behind at the garage. It's not coincidence. It's not contamination. It's you." The silence that followed seemed to stretch the walls of the room. Harper's breathing grew heavier, his shoulders rising and falling. Then came his first crack. "I didn't mean for it to happen." It was a phrase detectives knew well, the quiet shift from denial to admission. Bennett seized the opening. "Then tell us what did happen." Emily's family deserves the truth. For the next 2 hours, Harper's story unfolded in fragments, each piece darker than the last. He claimed he had offered Emily a ride that night after seeing her walk alone. He said she looked tired, vulnerable. But when she rejected his advances and tried to leave, he snapped. He struck her, panicked, and forced her into his truck. Detectives leaned in as Harper revealed details that had never been made public, details only the perpetrator could know. He described Emily's canvas backpack, the small tear near the zipper where she had stitched it with red thread. He recalled the way she had screamed when he drove past the I-40 exit, realizing he wasn't taking her home. He admitted he had dumped her belongings along the back roads near Monterey, scattering them so they wouldn't be found together. When Shaw asked what he had done with Emily's body, Harper hesitated, staring at the table. "I left her near the river. I thought the water would take her. But I couldn't watch." The detectives exchanged a glance. Search teams had combed the river in 2011, finding nothing. But Harper's words suggested he had placed her remains further upstream, in an area that hadn't been thoroughly searched. For Angela Walker, that revelation meant there was still hope of bringing her daughter home, even after 10 years. By the time Harper's first interrogation ended, the folder on the table was filled with notes, his partial confessions written down line by line. He hadn't admitted outright to murder, but his words painted a chilling picture of control, rage, and panic. Outside the interrogation room, prosecutors met with detectives, their expressions grim but resolute. The unreleased details, Emily's last words, the precise location where Harper had left her, and the chilling specificity of his account were kept from the public for now. Revealing them too soon could jeopardize the case in court. But for investigators, there was no doubt. They finally had the truth that had eluded Cookeville for a decade. When Angela Walker was told about Harper's admissions, she broke down in tears, not only from grief but from a strange, bittersweet relief. "All these years," she whispered, "I just needed to know. I needed to know what happened to my baby." For Cookeville, the revelation would not yet be shared in full. But behind the closed doors of that interrogation room, the story of Emily Walker's last night was no longer a mystery. It was a confession etched in words that no community, no family would ever forget. The morning sun broke over Putnam County with a pale golden light as search teams returned to the riverbanks where David Harper had said he left Emily Walker more than a decade earlier. Dew clung to the tall grass and mist rose in tendrils from the water's surface, creating a scene both haunting and strangely serene. For 10 years, the river had guarded its secrets. Now, with Harper's confession, investigators knew exactly where to look. Dozens of volunteers, deputies, and forensic specialists lined the muddy banks. Boats fanned out across the shallows while cadaver dogs paced the edge of the woods, noses pressed to the ground. The sound of shovels breaking the soil mingled with the low hum of an outboard motor as divers prepared to enter the water. It didn't take long. About an hour into the search, a deputy flagged the others over to a spot where the earth seemed disturbed. Beneath the layers of leaves and silt, fragments of fabric emerged, tattered but unmistakable. A piece of canvas, faded with time, with red stitching along a small tear near the zipper. Emily's backpack. The find was like a lightning bolt through the team. Some paused to compose themselves. Others pressed on, gently brushing away the soil with gloved hands. A few feet deeper into the embankment, bones surfaced, fragile yet enduring. A silent testament to the young woman who had vanished into the night all those years ago. When the remains were carefully placed into protective coverings, a hush fell over the scene. Even the birds seemed to pause their morning chorus as if nature itself was bearing witness. Sheriff Daniels, who had overseen the case since its earliest days, removed his hat and held it over his chest. News spread quickly. Angela Walker and her family were escorted to the site hours later, accompanied by grief counselors and detectives who had walked every painful step of this journey with them. Angela approached the yellow tape slowly, her hands trembling as she clutched Emily's childhood photo. Seeing the backpack, Emily's backpack undid her. She pressed the picture to her chest and whispered, "We found you, baby. We're taking you home." The town of Cookeville responded with a wave of empathy. A candlelight vigil was held on the Tennessee Tech campus, where hundreds of students and faculty gathered under the night sky. The air was filled with the soft glow of candles, the silence punctuated only by the sniffles of those who had come to honor Emily. Professors spoke about her curiosity, her love of literature, her laugh that carried across campus hallways. Friends recalled the way she never left the diner without giving her co-workers a hug. For the Walker family, closure did not mean an end to grief. It meant having a place to grieve, a grave to visit, and the knowledge that Emily's story was no longer lost in the shadows. Her funeral service, held at a small brick church just outside Cookeville, was overflowing. Strangers who had followed the case for years stood alongside friends and family, all united by a shared promise. Emily would never be forgotten. Investigators reflected on the journey, too. Many admitted they had feared the case might never be solved. But now, standing at the graveside or sitting quietly in their offices, they allowed themselves a measure of peace. Late justice, Sheriff Daniels said softly, is still justice. The recovery of Emily Walker was more than a conclusion to a criminal case. It was the return of a daughter to her mother, a student to her community, and a light to a campus that had lived too long in the shadow of unanswered questions. Cookeville, Tennessee would never be the same, but in that change lay resilience and the enduring strength of truth. By the time David Harper's trial began in early 2023, the courthouse in Cookeville had become the heart of a storm. National media descended on the quiet Tennessee town, reporters setting up cameras on the courthouse lawn. Locals who had whispered about Emily Walker's disappearance for years now stood shoulder to shoulder in lines that stretched down the block, hoping for a seat inside. For many, it wasn't just a trial. It was the final chapter of a story that had haunted the community for over a decade. Inside, the courtroom carried an electric tension. Emily's family sat in the first row, Angela Walker clutching her daughter's photograph, the edges worn from years of holding it close. Just feet away sat Harper, dressed in a gray suit provided by his defense team. His once rugged demeanor was replaced by a hollow stare, his hands trembling slightly as he shuffled papers at the defense table. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Rebecca Lawson, built its case on a foundation of science and confession. She began with the DNA evidence, meticulously collected, tested, and retested. The strap of Emily Walker's backpack, Lawson declared, holding up a photo, carried not just the weight of her books, but the undeniable imprint of this man's presence. DNA does not forget. It does not lie. Forensic experts testified that the probability of the DNA belonging to anyone other than Harper was 1 in several quintillion. They explained how his discarded soda bottle had provided the final key to unlock the mystery, confirming beyond doubt that he was the man who had been with Emily the night she disappeared. Then came the confession. Detectives Bennett and Shaw took the stand, recounting Harper's words in the interrogation room. They spoke of his admission that he had struck Emily, his description of her red-stitched backpack, and his chilling account of driving past her exit on I-40. These details, never released to the public, sealed the narrative. Only the person responsible could have known them. The defense tried to dismantle the case by questioning the reliability of memory after so many years. They suggested Harper had been coerced into confessing under pressure and that the DNA could have been transferred innocently. At one point, defense attorney Mark Harlan even suggested Emily had willingly gotten into Harper's truck, painting a portrait of a tragic accident rather than a crime. But the jury's expressions betrayed little sympathy. The most powerful testimony came not from scientists or detectives, but from Angela Walker herself. Standing before the jury, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes, she said, "For 11 years, I prayed every night to know what happened to my daughter. David Harper took that from me, and he took her from all of us. Emily deserved to graduate, to live her life, to have children of her own. Instead, we are here, begging for the justice she should have had the night she died." Her words pierced the courtroom, leaving many in tears, including jurors who quickly wiped their eyes. After 2 weeks of testimony and 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. The courtroom fell silent as the foreman stood and read the words. Guilty. Guilty of first-degree murder and kidnapping. Gasps filled the air. Angela buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with both grief and relief. Harper sat motionless, his gaze fixed on the table in front of him, as though refusing to look at the family he had shattered. Judge Randall Mason delivered the sentence. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. His voice was stern but resolute. "Mr. Harper, you lived freely among this community while the Walkers carried a burden no family should endure. Justice has caught up to you. May you spend the rest of your life reckoning with what you've done." Outside, The courthouse steps overflowed with townspeople holding candles, photographs of Emily, and handwritten signs that read, "Justice for Emily." The case that had once left Cookeville haunted now closed with the sound of a gavel. A verdict and a community standing united. For the Walkers, the pain would never vanish. But as Angela said quietly to reporters afterward, at least now Emily can rest. And so can we. In the months after the verdict, Cookeville began to breathe again. The shadow that had loomed since September 2011 finally began to lift, though the absence of Emily Walker could never be erased. On the campus of Tennessee Tech University, where Emily had once hurried between classes with her canvas backpack, students and faculty gathered to honor her memory. Beneath a maple tree near the library, a bronze plaque was unveiled. In memory of Emily Grace Walker, whose light continues to guide us. That tree, planted by classmates who had grown into adults carrying her story, became a quiet place of reflection. Each September, students placed flowers at its base, a ritual that transformed grief into a symbol of resilience. The Walker family chose not to retreat from the world, but to channel their pain into action. Angela and Thomas established the Emily Grace Foundation, a scholarship program for young women pursuing criminal justice and forensic science. "If Emily can't finish her education," Angela said at the launch, "then we'll help others do it in her name. We'll turn loss into opportunity." The foundation's first recipient, a bright-eyed sophomore from Putnam County, stood on stage clutching her award, a reminder that Emily's dream of helping others lived on through the work of those inspired by her. Local law enforcement also took lessons from the case. The Putnam County Sheriff's Office created a dedicated cold case task force, ensuring that no unsolved file gathered dust again. Detectives Bennett and Shaw often spoke at conferences about how advancements in DNA technology and persistent family advocacy had turned the tide. "This case shows us," Bennett said, "that time may pass, but science and determination can still speak for the voiceless." For the wider community, Emily's story carried a moral: vigilance and compassion matter. Neighbors began organizing safety escorts for students working late shifts, and the university improved campus lighting. What began as a tragedy slowly reshaped the way Cookeville cared for its own. But above all, Emily's story reminded people of the power of perseverance. Her family's refusal to give up, their endless vigils and anniversaries, their quiet but steady pressure on investigators, these were the forces that kept her case alive long enough for technology to catch up. Angela Walker put it best during a candlelight vigil marking the 12th anniversary of Emily's disappearance, held just months after Harper's sentencing. Standing in front of hundreds holding flickering candles, she said, "Justice may have come late, but late justice is still justice." And Emily's story proves that every voice matters, every effort matters, every prayer matters. Her words carried across the crowd, etched into memory like the glow of those candles in the Tennessee night. As we close this story, we remember Emily not only as a victim, but as a daughter, a student, a friend whose life inspired change. We honor her resilience, and the resilience of a family who refused to surrender. If you've stayed with us through Emily's journey, we thank you for carrying her memory too. Consider supporting local organizations that fight for cold case justice, or sharing this story to keep awareness alive. And if you'd like to join us as we continue to tell stories of truth, hope, and resilience, please subscribe and stay with us for the next case. Emily's voice was silenced in 2011. But today, through justice and remembrance, her legacy still speaks.